Was that Part 4 is amended stand part. Those of that opinion will say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. Members, we now move to the debate on Part 5. This is debate on clauses 153 to 184. The question is that Part 5 stand part.
Mr Chairman.
Dr. David Clark.
Mr Chair, I rise to speak to Part 5, and indeed there is much to say about this part in the bill. There is a great deal of interest in this part of the bill. Ms Barry asked if there's something new in this part of the bill, and I will be interested to see what she contributes to discussion on this part of the debate. She's been remarkably quiet up till now, and there have been a number of salient points raised and many questions asked indeed of the Minister in the Chair, but we've noted so far that the Minister in the Chair has been reluctant to answer any of them. Indeed, reluctant, apparently deaf, says my colleague, but we seem to have a new Minister sitting in the Chair, so we can try our luck with this one and see whether perhaps he might be willing to answer some of the questions that have been raised earlier around the loopholes that are created and the compliance costs on business, and whether there is an estimate available of those compliance costs. I raise these now in passing so that the Minister can turn to his officials perhaps and raise this issue with them if indeed he would like to address those concerns that were raised about further compliance costs and National's growing record of being on the wrong side of small business. But I want to say actually more right now about the KiwiSaver clause in this bill. Clause 154 in the bill deals with KiwiSaver, and this bill raises the contribution, the employee contribution for KiwiSaver from 2% to 3%. And you know, in itself, that is a 50% increase, as my colleague Damien O'Connor pointed out earlier. It's a very modest increase, and we know that National has been flip-flopping all over the place on KiwiSaver. I guess we can comfort ourselves that at least this flop is in the right direction. It's only 2 years ago that it cut the employee contribution from 4% to 2%. So what this legislation does is increase it from 2% to 3%, back up again, halfway back up. It went from 4% down to 2, now it goes from 2 back up to 3. So we'll wait for the next instalment from this government in terms of its KiwiSaver policy. I've made the point before that the National Government has more positions on KiwiSaver than the Kama Sutra, and you know, that is clear. They've cut it previously. It was to have been progressively raised under the plan that the previous government had to a 4% or 8% default rate of gross income by April 2011 for employees and a 4% default rate for employers. The National Government on KiwiSaver have discontinued the employer tax credit, and that effectively subsidised employers for the costs of providing KiwiSaver. They've capped the employer superannuation contribution tax exempt at 2%, and previously it was to have been 4%. So you know, you see they're all over the place. They've been reining it in, and now they're nudging it up. They discontinued the fee subsidy of $40 per annum. So again, they were reining the system in, and that's entirely inconsistent with what we see in this bill. That was aimed at ensuring that the accounts with low balances weren't eroded through taxes. The KiwiSaver plan that the Labor government put together was a good one. It was going to grow savings so that we had money in our economy for investment, so that we addressed the issue of capital debt that holds us back when we compare ourselves to, say, Australia, who have a $1.3 trillion superannuation fund sitting there looking for a home, looking for a place to invest profitably, and we wonder why Australia is getting ahead. And National also repealed the Employment Relations Act, which had aimed to ensure that employer contributions be on top of an employee's pay. Under National's changes, employees and employers now have the ability, as part of good faith negotiations, to contract out of this requirement. So, I mean, it's all about pulling the savings system back. And now, in this piece of the legislation, this piece of tinkering sees the employee contribution rate for KiwiSaver that they took from 4% down to 2% go halfway back up to 3%. So at least this flop, as I said at the outset, is in the right direction. But all this chopping and changing on KiwiSaver by the national government undermines Kiwis' confidence. And that, in itself, does nothing, absolutely nothing, Mr Chair, to improve our dire national savings situation. Labour's policy, which would look at introducing a universal KiwiSaver, will create an enduring solution and lift our savings rate, Mr Chair.
Dr David Clark.
Mr Chair. And raising our savings is desperately needed. My bill, which will come before the House to raise the minimum wage, would ensure all workers could afford to pay for compulsory super savings. So if we move towards that, we've got to make sure that people are resourced to be able to afford to make those savings, which will then benefit our economy over the longer term. So, Mr Chair, in this legislation we also have clauses in Part 5 to do with software development. And I'll turn to Part 5. Here we see clauses from page 90 onwards to do with KiwiSaver, and then further on page 94 of the legislation, clause 163, we have the unsuccessful software development and the treatment thereof, and a tax exemption. Now, some of my colleagues have already been wondering aloud in previous parts of the legislation, but that was not the time to have the debate about how unsuccessful software development could occur in terms of the IRD, who have a poor track record. 21 million was invested in a project to try and get the first of the reforms done within IRD, and that was a portion of that was written off because it was unsuccessful. Now we're told this $1 billion or $1.5 billion rebuild of the IRD computer system is coming up. We don't have a time frame for it. We have a Prime Minister that says we shouldn't be held to ransom by not having an effective tax collection system. Our current one was built in 1992, but we have no progress, no confidence that this problem is really being addressed. And so John Key's Valentine's Day promise to look at our software system, at the software for tax collection, the computer system that IRD has not been realised. It's looking more and more like a promise in vain, much like many of the other promises to grow our economy that Mr Key has made as leader. Now, in and of itself, this deduction for unsuccessful software development may encourage some businesses. Now, I'm not sure how this would affect, say, Mr. .com. He's come into the debate lately. He's had many successful, as I understand it, software developments in his time. But were he to have an unsuccessful one, I'm not clear from this, from my reading of the legislation, and perhaps the Minister would like to take a call on this, whether that would apply to him as a resident, but who is not a nationalised citizen of New Zealand. And I'd invite the Minister to take a call on that in due course. The further point on that, if we go on to clause 170, if I may, and I'm sure other speakers will come to the issue of software development because it's a pertinent theme, and you know, one of the slightly larger aspects of the bill in the context of very much a tinkering approach to tax change. I'm sure other people will come back to it, but clause 170 talks about certain repairs to fishing boats and the way in which the law applies to them in respect of the tax treatment. And so we have clause 170, subclause 1, in section DO2 brackets 1, part 4 of the Shipping and Seamen Act 1952 is replaced by part 10 of the Maritime Transport Act 1994. Now, there's some tidying up going on there, but there's other questions that spring to mind. You know, do the repairs, the provisions that apply to the repairs for fishing boats, you know, how broad is that category? Do those provisions also apply to, say, cabbage boats? I mean, if someone had a cabbage boat in need of repair, you know, if they say came down the river on the last cabbage boat, if someone thought that someone had come down the river on the last cabbage boat and they needed repairs to their cabbage boat, would these provisions in the law apply to that? Is a cabbage boat a fishing boat in this respect of the law? And so, you know, I think that's a legitimate question which the Minister in the chair might like to address, because I'm sure there will be people who might ask that question. You know, if They might claim they didn't come down the river on the last cabbage boat, but a lot of us suspect that they actually did. They may just not remember it, I guess, is the point, if their memory's failing about what boat they came down on, in fact, what river they were actually on when they were coming down, and whether there was a helicopter at the other end to meet them once they'd come down the river on the cabbage boat to look at claiming for perhaps unsuccessful, Mr. Chair.
Dr. Rajin Prasad.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry to take a call away from my member who said my friend.